Man versus machine is an argument that will become painfully, increasingly relevant as humans desperately grasp at their last fits of non-obsolescence before the robots take over and take all of our jobs. And so in part of this celebrating of man versus machine and the advent of automation, we're going to be benchmarking automated overclocking versus manual overclocking. The competitor is the EVGA 1070 Ti SC, which uses an auto OC to bypass the NVIDIA rules of, hey, don't overclock this. And they said, okay, we'll just make the software do it. So I'm going to see if I can beat that within the time frame that this thing auto overclocks itself. So I've got the same amount of time to do an OC here. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly, makers of the Conductonaut liquid metal that we recently used to drop 20 degrees off of our coffee lake temperatures. Thermal Grizzly also makes traditional thermal compounds for use on top of the IHS, like Cryonaut and Hydronaut pastes. Learn more at the link below. So the way this thing works, this is part of Precision, and basically it's a tool that does the volt frequency curve scan. So it's a VF scan, and it looks at what it thinks would be the ideal voltage and frequency. Now, there's two different things here to look at. One is the basic mode. Basic mode basically says that it has a voltage and frequency lookup table in the card. So EVGA, I think, has 3 predefined frequencies and voltages for an overclock that the basic mode checks against. And then whichever one appears stable is the one it will pick. I don't know what the table is. I just know there's at least 3 options. The other mode steps through manually and increments the VF across the entire range. It's a bit more complicated, and it also seemed a bit harder to work with. So we're primarily going to be testing against basic mode because it works better right now in this version of Precision. And the takeaway here is that there's a bit of a challenge. The better the silicon is, the bigger the disparity between my overclock and the machine's overclock, because I fully anticipate that I would be able to beat this. But as the silicon is worse in quality and lower down in the tier of the ASIC quality, so to speak, the overclocks will be closer, because the table is already predefined in a way that it won't overshoot. It will never shoot beyond the capabilities of any of the silicon really that these cards ship with. So the closer it is to the maximum clock out of the box due to silicon quality, the closer it will be to my potential overclock, because I would hit the same wall as the automation. So depending on how good that quality is will basically dictate how much I win by, because I am assuming I will win here. Just like any other human who has their job threatened by automation. Maybe you think that you can drive cars better than Tesla can. I'm going to boldly state that I can do it better all the way until I'm screaming down the highway, flying into an accident because I didn't trust the automated car to do it for me. So what we're going to do is switch over to basic. Now, before this, I did test the longer VF, and it didn't work quite as well. This version of Precision is still in development, and it needs some work still. So we're going to start this. We have 3 options here. Manual, which is what I'll be doing later. Quick test, which takes 15 to 20 minutes to do. And full test, which takes, dang it, I clicked full. And full test, which takes 30 to 60 minutes to do, but doesn't fully work. So we need to not do that one right now. Okay, there we go, quick test. So what this is doing now is it's running a rebranded version of Furmark. Furmark is a bit tricky for overclock testing because it's a power virus workload. It's not really representative of games, and sometimes Furmark will give you clocks in terms of offsets that are higher than what is realistically achievable in a game or in 3D Mark. But it's what they're using. It works sometimes as a baseline, and then I guess as long as you're conservative, which I think this auto OC will be, it's fine. So this is just scanning for artifacts right now. That's what that graphic indicates. And all it's going to do is scan a whole bunch of the different OC ranges. And it's at least 3, but there's more options in there for it to scan, especially if you do the manual VF scan, and then determine what the overclock will be. So we're just going to let this run for a little bit, finish, log how much time it takes to finish, and then I will have that amount of time to apply a competitive overclock to this one. Okay, so all this did was basically apply a 114 megahertz offset on the core. This is again a 1070 Ti, so that's going to matter. So 114 on the core, it did not increase the power target, and it doesn't increase the memory offset either, it looks like. So it's basically just a core overclock of about the value that EVGA or any other company would do out of the box normally under scenarios where NVIDIA hasn't restricted them. So 114 is what we have to beat. Now I'm going to run this in Firestrike, and we're not doing games or anything. There's really no point because, I mean, it's just performance scaling, and all we're doing is clock versus clock match up here. So we're going to do each Firestrike, Extreme, Ultra, Normal, and run all of them, collect the scores, and once we have those scores, I'm going to run my own overclock within the same about 18-minute window that it took to finish, and then we'll have the data to see who did it better. So here's where the actual competition starts. I have about 18 minutes to beat the Auto OC, and what we're going to do is, first off, immediately set this power target to 120%. The Auto OC does not do this, and I did set it to 120% after its Auto OC just to see if it helped out at all, but it didn't because we weren't hitting the power limit. So we were hitting other limits first. So we're going to set that to 120. Secret here, for anyone who doesn't know, the minute that Pascal goes over 60 degrees Celsius, you start dropping clocks. It's by design. It's part of Boost 3.0. It'll go down 25, 50 megahertz as you increment up and towards 82 to 84. So 82 to 84, although the more obvious throttle point, is not the only one. It is an incremented stepping. And yes, I know this counts against my time, but because I'm so confident that I'm going to win this battle, I don't really care. And you get to learn a bit about Pascal if you didn't already know it. So let's start with the fan speed at 65. I don't want to cheat by setting it to 100 and making it too easy. So you know what? Let's take it down to 60. Let's make it even easier for the program to win. So we're at 120. I'm going to set up a stress test, extreme, 60 loops, windowed, and we need GPU Z. And make sure OBS is going, yes. So GPU Z, we're just going to look at the sensors tab while this is running. And I already know, of course, that 114 is a minimum stable overclock because that's what it did. So there's definitely headroom there above it. Now, it did not do any overclocking on the memory, but I know from benchmarking dozens of Pascal cards at this point that they've never really failed to do less than 500. It's pretty rare for them to be incapable of hitting at least 400 megahertz offset on the memory. So we're at 150 offset on the core, 300 on the memory right now. And you know what? I think we've got some time here still. We're doing pretty well on time. We're already better than it in the overclock department. So let me just take a minute here, resize my windows, and make sure the environment's all good. Okay, so we're at 2037 megahertz core. Now, this is a bit misleading because Boost 3.0, as you all know, fluctuates depending on what's going on. So it's going to bounce down to 2025 sometimes, things like that. That will stabilize more as you approach 40 degrees Celsius, but we're not going to push for that on this air cooler. So let's go for, we're at 150 right now. Let's do 175 and just set apply on that. See if we remain stable. I'm going to give this a minute or so to burn in, and while it's burning in, we're still at 55 on the GPU. We're good there. I want to stay under 60 ideally if I really want the best chance of hitting a higher overclock. We'll push that up to 70% now. If we can't stay under 60, it's not the end of the world. It just means that we might be down anywhere from like 13 to 25 megahertz on the core. Not a big deal because we're going to beat the thing anyway. But if you're doing this for your own competitive scoring reasons, the fun thing about Firestrike is that it's a short test. So you can blast the fan speed, keep it under 60 easily for the entire test, and you'll score higher because the frequency is going to be more stable and higher. So we're looking good here. Let's do 200. And then all this will have to be burned in separately, and we'll do the benchmarks and things like that. It's not quite as easy as like it was stable for 1 minute, so it's therefore stable. That's not how it works, but that's not the point of this video either. So typically what we do for reviews is you let it burn in separately for a while, and then you play a bunch of different games, because some games like For Honor will enumerate the clock differently than others, and then synthetic applications, and then you can use all of that experience to figure out where the clock should actually be. Right now we're at 225 megahertz offset. Experience tells me that this should fail at some point soon, because we're pushing into the 2100 megahertz range on the core, which is absurd to be able to hold on to for most cards that we've worked with in this class. So we will see if it holds on, but it typically does not. For now, though, what we can do is start pushing up the memory a bit too, because that will benefit us a little bit. Oh, I didn't even hit apply. So I didn't hit apply yet, and it's crashed, which means it was not the memory that caused that crash, although it would seem that way if you thought I hit apply. So that means we are not stable at 225. Let's go down to 200. I think we still have time here to play around with the memory, so start that test back up. We're at 200 now. Let's go up to 500 megahertz on the memory. Make sure this is 200 and see how that goes. Waiting on Firestrike, costing me valuable time. Okay, so that's running. 200 offset core, 500 offset memory. We might be able to push it a little more, but let's just see if this is stable. And we're going to have to call the clock in a minute, so if it is, we'll keep these frequencies for the GPU. So this is looking stable. It's looking pretty good. We're going to run the tests at these frequencies because they're fine. They seem to be holding. You could push it a little further if you were really trying, but we're trying to just beat the auto overclock in the amount of time that it gave us to overclock. So that's our competitive bench with the auto OC. It's 200 and 500. Power target being a big part of it, and then we're gonna run some benchmarks and see what the numbers look like for each. Now, I fully expect, obviously, now that we've seen the clocks are higher, that these scores will be higher than the auto OC. The question is the auto OC good enough that for a user who, for whatever reason, maybe is timid about overclocking or frankly doesn't have the time to learn the basics to get started. I had a head start here. I already knew how to do all that stuff. So there's reasons to not manually OC. The question is the auto OC actually worth it, or should you just use the card stock at that point? So that's what we're going to find out. Okay, so the results are in. Let's start with the stock card. The stock card with Firestrike 1080p was scoring 20,229 points, and the roughly 18-minute overclock done automatically by EVGA was scoring 20,885 points, and when we applied a 20% power offset to try and help it, that didn't really change because we were already hitting other limits. So the difference there, auto versus stock, you gain 3.2% by running the auto overclocking utility, which again, it's a lookup table. It tests each one, and then if it crashes during that test or has artifacts, it goes down to the next one. That's how it works. So that got us 3%-ish. And this is Firestrike. This isn't a video game. Your mileage may vary. Games behave differently. Some of them love clocks. Some of them really don't care and just need more shaders. So it really depends on what you're doing. But for purposes of scalability and comparison, 3% versus mine was 8.1% versus the auto OC. Not versus stock, but versus auto. So at plus 200 and plus 500, core and memory, I was at 22,576 points versus the auto OC of 20,885. So an extra 8% there. Firestrike Extreme, the auto OC got 3.7% higher than stock, which is a comparison of 9859 points versus 9583 points. And mine got 8.7% higher than the auto OC, a difference of 10,806 points versus 9859 points. And then if you wanted to look at the FPS numbers, that's a difference of 57 for mine versus 52.4 for the auto OC versus 51.3 for the stock configuration. Firestrike Ultra, which is a 4K test, has the differences slightly bigger still because we start benefiting from other things, potentially that memory clock that the auto OC did not have. The auto OC is 2.9% ahead of stock with a score of 4874 versus 4736. And my OC is 5329 versus the others. So that's a 9.4% increase over the auto OC for the overclock that I did. So the takeaway here isn't to say anything like, look at me, I'm a great overclocker, because that's not really the case. It's just, if you want to do this yourself, it takes just as much time to do it as with the Auto OC. If you have a foundation of knowing what you're doing and you already know where all the tools are and what to download, things like that. The auto overclock is still useful. It's useful as a feature for people who want basically a one-click option to recover the clocks that were more or less taken from them by NVIDIA with a 1070 Ti, because the board partners are not allowed to release with a pre-overclock on a hardware level like with the other cards. So one-click button in software lets you get that back. But if you're doing that anyway, it's not that hard to do what I just did. Takes the same amount of time, and again, it's like another 8 to 10% headroom in the clock over auto. So not bad. The fact that this can do the lookup table and everything and get it done in 15 to 20 minutes is pretty good. It's certainly a step up from what used to be the case. The takeaway, though, if you do it manually, it's always going to be better for now until Tesla Motors gets into video card overclocking and wipes out the content creator jobs. But until that time, you might as well just do it yourself. And the tools you need, everyone here already knows this stuff, but Afterburner, GPU-Z is helpful. A synthetic software like Firestrike or Heaven are good. The reason I like those is because they're really easy to repeat, and the data is fairly consistent, and it's easy for anyone to run the benchmark without having to understand a complex game that may have special behaviors. So that's what I would recommend. But you know, if you're just trying to buy a card and click a button, then Auto OC gets you another 3% if you really want that. And then from there, I would recommend use that as your foundation starting point of saying this is the minimum it can do safely for sure, and then bump it up until it crashes. And that's how you use the Auto OC if you aren't fully sure where to start. So thank you for watching. As always, you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly, or you can just subscribe for more, because watching really is the biggest support we have right now. And leave a comment below, or go to store.gamersnexus.net to pick up a shirt like this one or one of our stickers. I will see you all next time.